Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for the next installment of my Solomon's campaign for Fire in the Sky, the Great Pacific War. Now, when I left off at the end of last turn, I'm afraid, as some of you will remember, I had stunningly failed as the Allies to relieve the siege of Port Moresby. And I went home with my tail very much between my legs because the Allied counter-offensive could have and should have succeeded, at least even if only partially, just by putting the Japanese ground units there on the back foot. But I made a bad decision, particularly with regards to the deployment of my air strength, and I paid a terrible price for it. So now as I swap hats again, as the Japanese third turn in this campaign dawns, they are looking forward to this turn with a renewed sense of hope and optimism. In fact, actually, if anything, they have good reason to feel confident. Now, I said in the previous video at one point that they needed to remember this was not the same war they were fighting back in December 1941, January 1942. Well, the action that was fought around here, if anything, has taught the Japanese that it is very much the same war that they were fighting nearly a year ago. The Allies are clearly as much of a pushover as they always were, and Midway and the earlier carrier battle round Guadalcanal at the beginning of the campaign are clearly some sort of bizarre aberration. But the most important thing for the Empire of Japan is that the way things are have reasserted themselves. And actually, they can look forward to a very strong turn now because, of course, the first thing that happens is their transport phase. So they still have 8 transport points left over from the previous turn. And with 21 merchant points left, they can cash in all of those transport points to gain oil, which is bad news. The Japanese now have a naval oil reserve of 19 fuel points. That is a lot. And even worse, their submarines reset. I don't know why I'm saying even worse, because I have, my Japanese hat on this turn. It's actually a really, really awesome thing. And lastly, the transport points, now that we're in the reinforcement phase, reset. If anyone's wondering, no, I am not going to be transferring any destroyers to convoy escort duties. That policy remains unchanged. Now, as for reinforcements that the Japanese receive, all they get this turn are 2 more air steps. So not a huge amount of reinforcement, but very welcome reinforcements nonetheless. And as has become my habit throughout this game, I shall place the aerial reinforcements in Yokosuka. There's no point putting them into carrier training because, as it's the second last turn of the game, we basically won't see them if I put them into carrier training. So we'll leave it at that. The other bits of good news, in addition to the 2 air points, are that I get the extremely useful Tokyo Express marker back, and Colonel Ichiki's reformed unit reappears. And actually, do you know what? In terms of transport, I should have been a bit smarter about this. I am going to put Ichiki in Kure, just because that's slightly more sensible for redeployment. I'll stick to my previous mistake with the aircraft because that was just me giving into habit and not really thinking about the implications. So, moving on to our first deployment phase, what are we going to do? Now, the victory here, or the defensive victory, has greatly emboldened the Japanese. And trying to play, true to the mindset, I think that the Allied failure last turn has demonstrated that we're basically invincible. We can do this. We can clear the whole of the lower Solomons with one brush of the armored sleeve. Even my cat seems to think so. So, if he's on board with this, then who's to argue? So, not only are we going to content ourselves this turn with completing the capture of Port Moresby, I'm abandoning the original concept of fighting the Allies to a draw. We will simultaneously seize Guadalcanal, because what could possibly go wrong with dispersed operations and divided efforts that may not necessarily be mutually supporting? I don't see a problem with that. So let's plan on how we're going to do it. Are there any opportunities for a one hex deployment? Not really, unfortunately. I do want to keep Kawaguchi over there in case the Allies try anything next turn. I mean, they'd have to be really foolish, but you never know. But I will need naval units here to escort these guys over to Guadalcanal. So let's start seeing what our navy can do. We've got the carrier force up in Truk. I'll just move this up a bit so you can see. They'll definitely be participating. I also would like, given how much oil we have available, to involve the battleships. So they're going to have to be brought forward. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, yes. So they can come to Truk. And the cost of moving them is 7.5. We can handle that. So the Japanese have 11.5 fuel points left. Talk about an embarrassment of riches. Oh, wait, hang on. No. I should have paid for that out of transport points. Whoops. So I shall deduct. Yep, 7.5 transport points. Apologies. And we've got 13.5 of those, so we are pretty well off. What about others? Rabaul is full of aircraft. We have no worries there. Do I want to redeploy anyone else? Yes, I want to bring the land-based aircraft from Truk Lagoon down to Lae, because I don't want to take any chances. The Allies showed me how wrong this could go. So just deduct the transport points for bringing them down. I might as well, leave them there. I'm thinking of the now tiny Japanese aerial garrison, the Gilberts, but there is literally no room for them in the Solomons because I filled the bases there to capacity. But what I may do is bring the newly arrived aircraft in the home islands down south. I can put them in Truk, that won't do any harm. So we'll move them down to Truk for another 2 transport points. Shall I? Shall I bring Colonel Ichiki's men down south? I think I will. The end of the game is coming and I sense big things are afoot. So Colonel Ichiki can leave Kure up in the far north. 1, 2, 3. Hang on. 1, 4, 3. Colonel Ichiki can join the forces at Rabaul. That costs me another 2 transport points altogether. Now, what about other naval units? Do we actually need any more naval units? Significant though this operation is, I'm going to say no, because in terms of supporting formations, I've got what I want. What we really need are naval units to escort the landing forces. So let's see what I've got up in Yokosuka. I'm going to bring down 2 task forces, a sea control force of 2 heavy cruisers, and... oh, actually, no, I already have a sea control force in the form of my battleships. I only really need these guys to escort the various infantry contingents. And I have to make sure I don't overcrowd the port of Rabaul. So let's see. 2 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers are worth 6. These guys, if I make an identical force, would bring it up to 12. No, I'm going to have to economize and use destroyers. So 1, 2, 3, 4.5, 5.5. Can we do it? Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4.5, 5.5, 6.5, 7.5. Yes, we can do it. But I'm going to have to spend an awful lot of transport points bringing these guys down. So let me see how feasible this is. I'll start with the small force. One of the escort forces will be a heavy cruiser and 2 destroyers, so that's 2, coming down from Yokosuka. So that will be 1, 2, 3, 4. Ooh, yes. We're running perilously short of transport points. Oh, and actually, I'll have to think harder about this because I have to allow enough transport points to actually send the invasion forces over. This is looking a bit harder than I thought. Mind you, I think it's worth risking a landing if we send a divisional-sized force. So I'm going to take the chance on it because we have so much support we can bring to bear. We'll easily put those Marines on the back foot. I mean, again, look what happened last turn. They're just going to be helpless targets. One brush of the armored sleeve, remember? So that's my operation. No, that's my deployment. The Japanese have exactly 4 transport points left, which is a bit risky. So now we move into operational movement. No change here. The besieging forces outside Port Moresby are quite happy where they are. But we will be invading Guadalcanal. So I am going to activate this task force. 1 heavy cruiser, 2 destroyers. And they will be escorting the 6th Division to Guadalcanal. Here it comes. So to pay for them, that's 2 oil points. I will be activating the hugely impressive battleship force. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5 fuel points to get these massively scary boys rumbling down for sea control. And I will also be activating the carrier force. Heavy cruiser, destroyer, light carrier, lightish, slightly heavier carrier. 1, 2, 3. That's another 4 fuel points to send them down to Guadalcanal. It's getting rather busy in this hex. Oh yes, and paying the transport costs. We have half a transport point left. So those are the Japanese deployments. They've been very costly in transport points and fuel. We have, as I say, half a transport point left and 5.5 fuel points left. So this is a major, major operation. Allied reaction, unfortunately for the Allies, there is none possible because all their units are up at Pearl, so they really have been caught on the back foot by this. And the Japanese are going to commit their long-range air units. So the unit of 2 from Lae is going to come and help bomb the defenders of Port Moresby, while the air forces at Rabaul are going to concentrate entirely on Guadalcanal. So, yikes, here it comes. So just to keep the tension a bit high, I am going to resolve the Battle of Port Moresby first. So, moving on to the battle board. We have Port Moresby's depleted defenders over there, and their strong but very vulnerable air units against the Japanese 43rd Division and the Nankai Regiment. Long-range air force from Lae. And that's it for the forces gathered here. I say that's it. It is very terrifying from the Allied perspective. So, air points. The Allies have an air strength of 4 on site versus the Japanese token air strength of 1. So rolling off, the Allies win that decisively. They gain air supremacy, but I don't know how much it's actually going to help them. And we go straight to ground combat. So 6 Japanese dice, no air support, but I don't think they really need it. Incredibly, the Japanese only get 2 hits. There may be hope for the Allies. So the Australians are going to make their roll. Everything that flies is committed to ground support. Oh my goodness. The Australians just managed to match the Japanese with 2 hits, which means that Port Moresby has not fallen. To the astonishment of everyone concerned, Port Moresby still stands. It's still under serious threat, but the Australians have done an absolutely sterling job of keeping the Japanese at arm's length for one more precious turn. When I come back as the Allied player, I will do my best not to waste the incredible opportunity they've given us through what must be sheer grit. Even the Japanese had to grudgingly admit that that was a pretty hard fight. So what's going to happen over at Guadalcanal? So while Port Moresby's hanging on by its fingernails, Guadalcanal finds itself isolated and alone as well, with many, many Japanese task forces heading towards it. That is a very frightening amount of Japanese naval power, as it's meant to be. We wanted this to be a sure thing. As the Japanese player, I'm beginning to feel a tiny bit uncertain now because Port Moresby was supposed to have been a sure thing and it wasn't. So let's hope that the US Marines prove a softer target than the Australians. Because I want some sort of victory to be able to report to Tokyo after this. So, air points. The United States has 2 air points based at Guadalcanal. The Japanese have turned up with 4 carrier points and 2 points of long-range air for 6. The US is rather outnumbered here. So the Japanese make their roll. Ooh, ouch. They've basically knocked the poor Cactus Air Force right out the park, but the US pilots do get a chance to shoot back. Unfortunately, they did nothing to their Japanese opposite numbers. They must have been caught on the ground that time. So this time, the Japanese get to enjoy placing an air supremacy marker. So how is this going to pan out? There's no opposition at sea. So the Japanese don't even have to bother with sea control. They are just going to go in. All of their air points are going to be committed to ground support. They really want to win this one. And yes, the ships will also be conducting bombardment. So there's going to be a lot of Japanese dice roll. And of course, the 6th Division will land not exactly unopposed, but it's going to be a rough ride for the US. So I'll just roll for the Japanese air points committed to the ground support roll. Oh, but before I do, anti-aircraft. No, bad luck for the US. None of the Japanese air points are brought down, so they all come bearing in. And they score 2 hits. I'll use a dice to keep track of that. Now it's the turn of the ships, the bombardment forces. Ouch. That's a lot of battleships. Yep, that is a lot of battleships. They open fire as well. Ow. Oh dear, that's another 4 hits. And finally, the Japanese 6th Division splashes aggressively ashore. Ooh, and they get another 3 hits. That's nasty. Well, the US Marines are going to put up as good a fight as they can against these odds. But they only score 1 hit. And unfortunately for them, the Japanese have scored such a superiority of hits, greater than the number of Allied hits, plus all the other bits and pieces, the strength of the unit. And so it's 4, and the US scored 1 hit. So that's a total of 5. They still exceeded that. So unfortunately, the 1st Marine Division evaporates. And they will not be coming back within the scope of the game. That is a bit of a disaster, to put it mildly. So Guadalcanal, unfortunately, has fallen. The air units are lost as well with the base. And it looks like the Japanese may well have secured victory in this game, unless the Allies can do something about it. So control of Henderson Field and the base has reverted to the Japanese. But they've also made themselves vulnerable because they've committed very heavily in terms of ships. And all these ships now have to go back to the home islands. Which means that on the Allied turn, the Japanese will be a bit short of forces that can respond. And there may be an opening for the US there. Now, I'm thinking, in a reversal of my earlier mistake with Japanese deployments, I shall send the heavy forces at least back to Kure, where it's marginally easier to redeploy them. But just to keep things neat, I might just send that lot back to Yokosuka. I just realised I forgot to give the poor US a chance to commit their sub points. I will do so now, retrospectively, because it's never too late to launch a submarine attack. And I ruled that they would have probably tried to go after the battleship bombardment force in an effort to protect Guadalcanal. So that force had a destroyer attached, which didn't succeed in its dice roll. And the US submariners would have targeted Yamato and Musashi, but they missed. So, okay, no harm done. Sorry for forgetting that rather crucial step. That did give the Japanese a nervous moment in the end, after all. But yes, an interesting turn for the Empire of Japan. But they are now winning the game on points. They have recaptured Guadalcanal, which means that they have 20 victory points in total in the bag. And despite the astoundingly solid defence the Australians put up at Port Moresby, if nothing is done to relieve that base soon, it may well fall to the Japanese. So the Allies are in a terrible state in the South Pacific at the moment. And one wonders what's going to happen from here. So we've done the return to base. The Japanese do have a second deployment opportunity now, but they can't really do anything with it because they spent all of their transport points, except for half a point, which is not very useful. And I think, is it even worth them cashing in on that? It probably is, even if they do nothing more than send a destroyer partway down. In fact, they'll do that. They will, as a token gesture, send a crowd of Akizuki-class destroyers to the Marianas. But that's all they can do by way of trying to mitigate their absence of naval units in the theatre. Now, basically, they're in exactly the same position the Allies were. So that is not so great for them. But that said, they have plenty to celebrate. Actually, rather than move the Akizukis, no. What I will do is spend that last transport point denuding the garrison of the Gilberts to get at least a token Japanese air presence on Guadalcanal, because I think that's far more useful. So there we go. That is now the end of the Japanese turn, and they're not totally thrilled with it because they would have liked to have ended the turn securing both Guadalcanal and Port Moresby. And to be perfectly honest, Port Moresby was the more likely candidate to collapse. But as it turned out, it was not to be. But the Japanese did execute a masterful assault on Guadalcanal, very well supported by air and naval assets, and that's really what clinched it. I did forget to mention it during the combat, but I was taking into account the fact that the US forces were out of supply because of the ring of Japanese warships around Guadalcanal. And that had a terrible impact on their ability to fight back. So that's that. I'm going to stop here again. We'll have to see what the Allies do next turn. The situation in the Solomons is really not great. Early 1943 is looking disastrous. But they will have opportunities to turn it around. There are 2 full Allied turns left before the game is called. And the scenario ends. So we'll see what happens. The situation is still unresolved, even though the Japanese are riding high at the moment. Um, so, as always, it just remains for me to say a huge thank you to all of you for watching this video and following the series. Hello to my veterans. I hope my play as the Japanese was a bit more competent than my play as the Allies last turn, and I owe it to the Allies to give them a better showing next turn. I'll do my best. Anyone who's visiting my channel for the first time, if this is your first video, a very warm welcome to you. I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you'd like to see more relating to Fire in the Sky, please look at the playlist to see what else I've done for this marvelous game. But if it's wargaming in general that's brought you here, I hope you find something else on the channel that you like. Feel free to wander around and have a look. And I hope you've all enjoyed this as much as I have putting this together. Whoever you are and wherever you're watching from, thank you so much for your company and for your comments and any feedback you'd like to leave. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon in the next video. Take care. Bye.